Palantir, in concordance with Poindexter's ambitions, has been a major piloter of pre-crime technology in the United States. The way it was initially sold to the public was this is a way to stop terrorism attacks before they happen by collating so much data from all different sources. Palantir, funding-wise, was set up with money from Peter Thiel. The other funding source was the CIA's In-Q-Tel.
Whitney Webb just exposed Palantir's scheme to enslave us through dystopian pre-crime programs, not unlike that of the plot of Minority Report, the Tom Cruise movie. And I know you're thinking this must be hyperbole, but this technology is being used at some of the biggest police departments in the United States. So in this clip, she gets into how Palantir began, who was its initial source of funding, and why this is a tyrannical prospect we need to guard against. Also, how closely Palantir is tied into the current administration. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Whitney, let's go back to the beginning. Poindexter, Iran-Contra, which I covered, actually, when I was in Nicaragua, because that's really the origin of where we are today.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would argue, one of the best starting points, and also thanks so much for having me on, Chris. So John Poindexter, as of course you know, was one of the national security advisors to Reagan and was the highest ranking member of his administration that was indicted as part of Iran-Contra, but he is also remembered as the quote-unquote godfather of modern surveillance. And this is in part because of his efforts in the immediate post-9/11 era, pioneering an office within DARPA that housed a program called Total Information Awareness. So right after the Reagan administration, Poindexter was sort of in various roles throughout these tech companies that were sort of a prototype to what Palantir and Total Information Awareness would later do, like Saffron Technology, Syntech Technologies, that were defense contractors and trying to basically create, predictive analytics to determine what terrorists would do next, all before 9/11 even happened. And of course, there was a renewed demand for that type of technology and these sort of innovative solutions in the immediate post 9/11 era. When this information, was reported on Total Information Awareness, there was a huge outcry throughout, U.S. mainstream media. A lot of organizations, including the ACLU and organizations like that, rightly noted that it would eliminate the constitutional right to privacy and create this very disturbing era of mass surveillance by, I think one of the mainstream media reports on it said that it would fight terrorism by terrifying U.S. citizens, basically.
And that's what exactly they did after 9/11 in so many other ways, like the Patriot Act and the DHS and the TSA and, the 20-year occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. You had to give up a little bit of your liberty to get some security. Remember, that's what the neocons told us? But this is no different, and I think the key thing to remember here is they tried this scheme to collate data and build these pre-crime programs to essentially use algorithms to determine how likely any given individual was to commit crimes, put them under surveillance, gather their data, collate it, and make that judgment. They tried to do that under the umbrella of government. But when there was outcry against it, what did they say? It wasn't, oh, no, we can't do that. That's too criminal. That's too terrible. No, they just outsourced it to the private sector, kind of, where there's still ties between government and the private sector. They just now have cover to do this without it being the government as the single player here. It was a government and corporate collusionary scheme, essentially fascist, to get this done, and that's what Palantir's doing now.
And making everyone a suspect under this type of this paradigm he was seeking to usher in. And so it was eventually, under pressure. It was, I think, first announced in February 2003, and by May they attempted to change the name to Terrorism Information Awareness, trying to move away from the idea that it would be total, it would surveil absolutely everyone through a name change, but obviously it didn't change how the program actually worked. It would still be focused on everyday Americans a total dragnet, really. And in that same month where that name change happened, Peter Thiel incorporated Palantir. And as Palantir was developing as a company, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, the Palantir co-founders, reached out to Poindexter directly through Richard Pearl, who's a well-known neoconservative figure and was also one of the architects of the Iraq War at the Bush-era Pentagon.
Yeah, Richard Pearl tied into this. What a surprise that is. As she said, chief neocon, chief advocate of the war in Iraq, a major player in the Project for a New American Century, wrote a document that said, hey, we want an empire build and, use the might of the U.S. in the unipolar moment, but what it might take is a Pearl Harbor-like attack to get that. Well, they got that under 9/11. Unsurprisingly, he's totally on board with the surveillance machine and the Palantir scheme to take what TIA was going to do, if it wasn't so controversial under government, and support that in the private sector. What do you know?
And basically they hatched this plan to privatize this program, rightly calculating that if they turned it into a entirely private sector enterprise, the outrage would, essentially dissipate, which it remarkably did, because originally it was a public-private partnership housed within DARPA, and then by making it this private sector enterprise, a lot of the concerns about it disappeared, and this is arguably because by moving into the private sector, they were able to accomplish a lot more than they could have by being affiliated directly with the public sector, even though they contract with the public sector. And so Palantir, funding-wise, was set up with money from Peter Thiel himself, and that the algorithm for it had originally been developed at PayPal, and the other funding source was the CIA's In-Q-Tel.
And what do you know? The CIA funded Palantir at its initial steps. I think it gave it $2 million as part of its seed money through In-Q-Tel. That's the CIA's kind of financial branch. And the CIA served as the first and only client of Palantir, I think, for something like 5 years after that, by the way. And isn't it remarkable? This is the same strategy that was used under the COVID regime to try to say, hey, it's a private company. They can do whatever they want, right? When it comes to the vaccine mandates, well, we know that the government was urging them to do that, was giving them special treatment to do that, special benefits to do that, just as they were giving big tech special benefits and treatment if they would just censor the users that the government wanted. So the government was involved in those two cases, just as it is in mass surveillance and Palantir.
And one of the figures that helped made that funding decision was the CIA's chief information officer at the time, named Alan Wade. And Alan Wade had been one of the top allies of the Total Information Awareness with Poindexter, in the immediate post 9/11 era. And so the CIA was Palantir's exclusive client for, I believe, the first 6 years of its existence as a company. And its engineers went to Langley, CIA headquarters in Virginia every 2 weeks for several years as well, where the CIA was developing their algorithm with them, in a very direct partnership. And Alex Karp has even said that the CIA was always the intended clients.
Yeah, and some people want to think that guy's the hero, right? Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. And guess who they're so closely connected with? Guess who is essentially their political protege? J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. Might be president in 2028. I have faith that the independent media won't let this die. I hope they can't let this die. That he has to answer questions about this and his ties to this sinister scheme to enhance and expand the surveillance state and pre-crime programs far beyond the horrors that Edward Snowden blew the whistle on.
Of Palantir. So I guess I'll pause there, and I'm happy to go in any other direction.
Explain what it does, what Poindexter's goal was, and what they were able to establish. I mean, the mechanics of it.
So Poindexter's goal was extremely broad. I mean, it really covered, it's absolutely staggering when you think about it. So the way it was initially sold to the public was this is a way to stop terrorism attacks before they happen, by collating so much data from all different sources and then using it in some sort of analytic or AI to determine, if certain data points are flagging that a terrorist attack will take place here or there. But there's various different aspects of this program that didn't really get enough coverage at the time. So one is that they attempted to use free market forces to determine if a terrorism attack would happen. Before it happened, they created basically what's referred to as a terrorism futures market. It was really like a forerunner to poly market and some of these predictive markets where people bet on things online. It was basically that, but about whether a terrorist attack will happen in the Middle East, or if there will be turmoil in the Middle East, if someone like Yasser Arafat would be overthrown. These were the kinds of things they were going to have these unnamed investors bet on. Another one was focused entirely on health under this program called biosurveillance, which actually a lot of it Palantir helped launch with HHS during the COVID era. Things like analyzing American wastewater to determine if there is going to be an outbreak of a disease before it happens, again, with an algorithm, or basically, surveilling Americans' health data.
All this takes broader surveillance that the US public hasn't consented to, doesn't want, hasn't passed via legislation at all. This is all ordained by an oligarchy tied in closely with the government. For everyone that says, this government, all we're doing is trying to be democratic and side with democracy at all cases. But no, it's a closely knit alliance between big firms, big surveillance, and big government working together to subvert our liberties. It's no different than what the NSA did independently. Well, not even independently, but using the leverage from the telecom giants like AT&T and Verizon to collate Americans' data without Americans giving them consent to do it. It's the same thing here.
And to determine if there will be a pandemic before it happens, or if there will be a bioterror attack. Because remember, this was also in the aftermath of the anthrax attacks. And so a lot of that, particularly on the health front, has absolutely come under the portfolio of Palantir in the years since. They now control basically all of the health data at HHS, and also the CDC under the HHS, and also the NHS in Britain as well, and have continued to expand on that front. But Palantir, also works extensively now in the private sector as well. They're a major AI engine for Wall Street banks, for example, and they have different, programs that are sold to different entities, but ultimately they are a massive contractor to essentially every U.S. intelligence agency, and that includes DHS and ICE, which a lot of the critical reporting on Palantir focuses on their contracts with ICE specifically, but all of that is intended to also be used against people that are not illegal immigrants.
Just as the Patriot Act, remember, it was just going to be used against the terrorists. We have nothing to fear, right? But it did apply to all of us. The TSA existed just to root out terrorism. Well, we're all subjected to that and the violations of the Fourth Amendment. This is a device to lay tyranny and then just use it against dissidents, people that the government doesn't want to, be able to have basic rights. This was used against Republicans after neocons said that these powers had to be created and imparted to the deep state in the FBI and the CIA, but it was the CIA and the FBI that tried to entrap them in the Fedsurrection of January 6th, the Whitmer entrapment. It was the feds trying to undermine the president under the auspices that he was too close to Russia. Even though he withdrew from the INF, he was aiding Ukraine with $400 million worth of weapons that could be used offensively. He denounced Putin for giving Snowden safe haven. He slapped on new sanctions, and they used that to take down the president. Well, they're trying to do this with the deep state such that they have power to subvert dissidents. No matter who's in power, this is going to be wielded against people other than illegal immigrants.
It's meant to be an entire dragnet of basically pre-crime, and Palantir, in concordance with Poindexter's ambitions, has been a major piloter of pre-crime technology in the United States. I think they began doing that in New Orleans initially, but they call it predictive policing is the term that they use. But a lot of other companies have attempted to also get in on this.
She's absolutely right about that. Actually, it did start as a pilot in New Orleans. This is an excellent article at the Free Thought Project, excellent site that covers Palantir. In 2018, this pre-crime scheme using Palantir software was used. Supposedly it was abandoned, but even today, it's used by Los Angeles and Operation Laser, this pre-crime program, remember, collecting data on people, putting it through an algorithm and predicting whether they'll commit crimes, as justification to surveil them more, undermine them more, curtail their civil liberties. It's also being used by police and sheriff departments in New York and Chicago today. Some of the biggest police departments and law enforcement entities at a local level in the United States and probably the world today is using this technology. So this isn't just this absurd conspiracy theory that you can just brush aside. They're literally trying to build Minority Report, this subversion of due process that we're supposed to have as Americans. It says that in the Fifth Amendment, right? But not to be if you're Palantir. You just get around that, I suppose.
One of the most notorious being Predpol, that was a partnership, I believe, with UCLA and LAPD or something to that effect. And they're notoriously inaccurate, and they're almost always piloted in low-income minority neighborhoods, and basically are a way, in essence, what happens because the accuracy rate is so low is that you're creating this pipeline of people basically being sent to prison, or being caught up in crimes that are very petty. But you're just sending police to all these areas in a relatively discriminatory way. The Predpol is really outrageous because it's like accuracy was found to be like insanely low, and they didn't phase it out despite the extreme inaccuracy. It was worse than a coin toss.
Yeah, she's absolutely right about that. Take a look at this article dealing with Predpol, a user of this technology. This article, was put out in 2023, but at one point, the company Predpol had to rebrand as Geolytica just because it was so unpopular, unpalatable, and just so discredited in a major way. This article talks about how, hey, there was 23,000 predictions generated by Geolytica that was used in a place called Plainfield. It's in New Jersey, to pilot this, and putting these predictions through an algorithm resulted in a 1% rate of success, meaning 1% of the people who they thought would be committing crimes committed crimes. So it's way worse than a coin toss, way worse than Whitney Webb even purports. And this article is great. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of this company and talking about the massive number of predictions, but relatively small number of crimes. And that's what we see here, all to pervert our liberties in, an embrace of this perversion of our basic rights. We don't get to utilize our basic rights if our privacy is just up for grabs by the government. They can just, ignore that, no problems, none asked, through these surveillance measures. And I gotta say, I'm sorry, I think this is such a big story for how little coverage it gets. And I'm so glad that Whitney's here to talk about it. I hope she writes, a longer length book about this. She'd be the person to do that. Her book on Epstein's fantastic. She's one of the foremost experts on this topic in general. But so many of the worst forces within government have swirled around this, from the neocons to those supporting the surveillance state to those connected to, some of the people in this administration that don't end up taking that much flack about this because it doesn't get that much mainstream coverage. But thankfully, Chris Hedges and Whitney Webb, both of which are total heroes in the field of journalism, are talking about it. But what do you think? Do you think Palantir's a big threat? What do you think this means for J.D. Vance's 2028 presidential term? Let me know in the comments down below. What are you more apprehensive about? Palantir's surveillance technology, their biometric programs, their pre-crime programs? Let me know down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Chris Hedges. Again, a heroic journalist. Thank you, Chris, for this interview. It's awesome. If you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. And if you do that, I'll really appreciate it, and I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, if you want a free digital copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. You can get access to that for free. No obligations, no cost. It's my defense of a decentralized political system rather than the perverted, centralized empire-building government we have today. And I go through why that's the case. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.